Is Anbernic's Sega Saturn tribute to Arc-D worth picking up? How well do each of the emulators perform? Is the old school layout better for fighting games? Let's find out. The Anbernic Arc-D comes with the choice of two operating systems, Android and Linux. If you're picking up the Arc-S, do note it only comes with Linux and lacks the touchscreen capabilities found in the Arc-D. Normally with Anbernic handhelds, Android is the main operating system and Linux only kind of works. There are examples where Linux runs great, but for the most part, Anbernic's Linux normally needs a lot of work to get it working as well as the Android side of things. That's how things are normally anyway. With the Arc-D, it's the opposite. Android is severely lacking, while Linux works well. I'd even go as far as saying Android right now is a bit of a mess. Despite coming with Wi-Fi 5, I could only pull a maximum download speed of around 4 to 5 megabytes per second. On my Steam Deck, I get around 30 megabytes per second. Then there's the touchscreen, which often needs extra presses to register taps. I also couldn't get the zip utility to decompress my ROMs either, which was a massive headache. As someone who keeps their ROMs in compressed formats to save space, having to download WinRAR when there's already a zip extractor on the device feels like one of many extra steps. Android also doesn't come with Google Play, and despite my best efforts to install it myself, I couldn't get it working, meaning any extra apps needed to be sideloaded by downloading the app's APK file and installing it manually. Anbernic has included a custom game launcher, and while it works, it's not anywhere near as visually appealing as something like Daijasho. If I'm saying that right. I'm not, I know. There's also no box art, and it can't read multiple track files as one singular game either. Linux, while lacking the same level of customization as Android, is the superior option as far as I'm concerned. Its more compact nature means once you're set up, you don't need to worry about getting anything else. Just drop the ROMs into the respective folders, update the game list in the settings menu, and they'll appear alongside the emulator or in the RetroArch tab. Simple stuff. The biggest problem with Linux right now is that Anbernic has disabled a bunch of options. It's Emulation Station, sure, but there's no scraper to grab box art and you can't download additional themes. A custom emulation station for Anbernic devices by the name of Retro Arena is on the way, but it's another one of those extra steps I mentioned. In a frankly bizarre move, the Android side of the Arc-D comes equipped with several emulators it's just not powerful enough to fully utilise. Aether SX2, the PS2 emulator for mobile devices, makes its presence known, but it's a miserable experience. In fairness, that's not a surprise given we're working with the RK3566 chipset, with 2GB of RAM or 1GB in the Arc-S. Simply put, those specs just aren't powerful enough to emulate PS2 to any acceptable standard, which makes the inclusion of Aether SX2 all the more bewildering. Those systems not being able to run is understandable though. Given the lack of an analog stick, even if you could run PS2 games, not having analog sticks would make them unplayable anyway. So, it's not a massive loss and not something I'm going to hold against the device. What is more damning is the fact that Dreamcast isn't quite where it needs to be. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 runs well enough, but games like Sonic Adventure 2 suffer severe slowdown and choppiness. You could argue that's fine due to the lack of an analog stick, but lots of Dreamcast titles can be worked around by mapping stick inputs to the D-pad. Here, take a look at this.
Attention all units. Suspect seen heading south. Block all major roads and capture the suspect.
It's not great, is it? Are we really at the point where Dreamcast is too difficult to run on cheaper handhelds? That surely shouldn't be the case. What did surprise me is how well N64 worked on Android. There is an issue with the lack of an analog stick once again, so not every game will be playable. That said, I used my Dreamcast workaround on Super Mario 64 and it is very playable despite the lack of an analog stick. Thankfully, Linux overall performs much better than Android. With the exception of N64, everything I tested runs much better on the Linux side of things. Dreamcast is the biggest win here. It's still imperfect, but I found it to be less choppy and the audio works much better. Sonic Adventure 2 runs at close enough to full speed that I'd consider it playable. PSP is still just as dire as it is on Android, and on Linux you can't even change the renderer. The problem here is that changing from OpenGL to Vulkan results in the emulator needing to reboot, but because it's running in Emulation Station on Linux, it simply shuts down instead of rebooting. It's not a major issue though. I can't see PSP working well on the Arc-D anyway, even if you could change the renderer. The chipset just simply isn't up to scratch when it comes to this one. DS meanwhile runs well, but for some reason the Drastic emulator can't recognise the Arc-D's touchscreen, meaning it's impossible to advance in certain games. When it comes to the ARC-D, I'm equal parts impressed and equal parts annoyed. For me, I'd rather have one operating system that does everything well, rather than two that do some things well and some things terribly. With the ARC-D, I was constantly needing to switch between the two operating systems to play different games. The way I see it is this. For N64 and DS games, you want to load up Android. For everything else, just go with Linux. With the problems in both operating systems, it's hard to recommend the ARC-D for anything above PS1. Below PS1 runs brilliantly in both operating systems, but the moment you throw N64, DS, PSP or GameCube into the mix, the limitations of the RK3566 chipset become apparent. If you're looking at this device as a way to play new school retro games, so GameCube, PS2, that kind of thing, it's not that. But if you're after something that plays old school retro games from the SNES, Genesis and before, that's where the RG ARC-D truly shines. Although pixels can look a little blurred, the colour gamut on the 4-inch IPS display, which runs at 640 by 480 pixels, stuns in all the right ways. It reproduces colour effortlessly, and the brightness, even at 50%, illuminates more than enough. It's funny actually. I reviewed products 3 times the price of the ARC-D with much worse screens than this. There is the issue I mentioned about Linux not always recognising the touchscreen or ignoring it completely, and that taps sometimes take a few attempts to register, but in terms of quality and visuals, there is very little to grumble about. You're going to have to bear with me on this, it'll make sense. Retro handhelds are a lot like Lego bricks. You can buy knockoff Lego bricks and they'll do the job. Look good enough, but they lack that premium finish that comes with official Lego bricks. That's how Anbernic devices are. If you hold an Asus ROG Ally, then you hold the ARC-D, you'll notice one feels made from high quality plastics and the other feels more like a toy. Is that a problem? For me, not at all. In terms of pricing, the ARC-D costs from $89.99 while the ARC-S is $69.99. Of course, it's not going to feel like a $699 handheld. So instead of looking at which handhelds do it the best, let's look at other handhelds in this price bracket. I'd say the ARC-D is on par with the likes of the Retroids and Powkiddies of this world. I'd even go as far as saying the overall design and build quality are actually above and beyond what's expected for this price. The matte black finish feels smooth and the buttons pop out and in with the right amount of force. No buttons got stuck in the shell either, which isn't something you can say for certain Retroid devices. Who is the ARC-D for? This is an easy one to answer. The ARC-D is clearly geared towards people who've played Street Fighter 2, Mortal Kombat and other similar retro fighting games. The reason for the 6-button layout isn't simply because it looks like a Saturn controller and that's cool. The reason the Saturn went with 6 buttons is because games like Street Fighter 2 split controls into light punch, medium punch, high punch and the same for kicks. On controllers like the SNES, pressing triggers is much more awkward than pressing a face button in fighting games. It's the same for modern fighting games as well, and that's why the Sega Saturn is so revered by players even to this day. It takes that arcade style setup and translates it perfectly into a controller format. Given anything above PS1 doesn't work or will struggle to run due to the lack of a stick, the ARC-D is best experienced with old school retro games. You'll get a kick out of playing Mario 64 on the ARC-D, sure, but if you're also into fighting games like me, you're going to get even more mileage out of the ARC-D. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. There is a lot to dislike about the ARC-D. But you know what? None of that matters to someone like me. I approached the ARC-D wanting to play fighting games from the 16-bit era with a 6-button controller. And thanks to an excellent screen, brilliant build quality and a solid battery life that averaged around 4 to 6 hours depending on the emulator, the ARC-D is everything I wanted it to be. For people wanting to play new school retro games, they'll be disappointed. PSP is awful, and anything above that is even worse. But for people who actually use the original Genesis or Saturn 6-button controller in their younger years, they're the ones who are going to really love the ARC-D. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like, and if you'd like to subscribe, that would be awesome. Until next time, see ya.